In the realm of environmental science and research methodology, understanding various research methods is crucial for conducting scientific investigations. These methods form the backbone of any research process, guiding researchers to systematically gather, analyze, and interpret data to answer specific questions. This lecture will provide a detailed breakdown of the different research methods used across disciplines, especially in the context of environmental science, to help you excel in UGC NET JRF Environmental Science. Types of research methods. Research methods can be broadly classified into two main categories, qualitative and quantitative. These two methods represent fundamentally different approaches to research, each suited to different types of questions and problems. 1. Qualitative research methods. Qualitative research is used when the goal is to explore phenomena in depth and understand the meanings, experiences, or perceptions of people. It is primarily focused on subjective data and provides rich, detailed descriptions that help explain complex, non-quantifiable factors. Key features of qualitative research. Non-numerical data collection, involves interviews, observations, and textual analysis. Exploratory nature, ideal for understanding behaviors, attitudes, or social phenomena. Inductive reasoning, begins with observations, then builds theories or patterns. Focus on context, looks at phenomena in their natural settings. Common qualitative research methods. Interviews, structured, semi-structured, or unstructured interviews are used to gather personal experiences or opinions. Case studies, detailed investigations of a single instance or case, e.g., a specific environmental policy or local ecosystem. Focus groups, group discussions that allow researchers to gain insights into participants' attitudes, beliefs, and experiences. Observational studies, involves observing behaviors or processes in their natural environment. Ethnography, an in-depth exploration of a culture or community, often used in environmental studies to understand the relationship between local communities and natural resources. Example in environmental science, a qualitative study on community-based conservation might involve conducting interviews with local residents to understand how they perceive conservation efforts and how these efforts impact their livelihoods. 2. Quantitative research methods. Quantitative research is more structured and focuses on numerical data. It is used to measure variables and look for patterns or relationships. The goal is to develop generalizable results that can be applied to larger populations. Key features of quantitative research. Numerical data. Data is collected through instruments like surveys, tests, or experiments. Statistical analysis. Data is analyzed using statistical techniques to determine relationships, correlations, or trends. Hypothesis-driven, typically involves testing hypotheses to confirm or refute theories. Objective approach, emphasizes objectivity, replicability, and the ability to generalize findings. Common quantitative research methods. Surveys, questionnaires, used to gather data from a large population. These can be structured or unstructured and involve closed-ended questions. Experiments, controlled studies in which one or more variables are manipulated to observe their effect on other variables. Content analysis, the systematic analysis of content, e.g., text, images, or videos to identify patterns or trends. Longitudinal studies, involve repeated observations over time to study changes and developments. Example in environmental science, a quantitative study might involve surveying a community to assess the level of knowledge about water pollution and its correlation with the community's water usage practices. The data could then be analyzed statistically to draw conclusions. 3. Mixed methods research. Mixed methods research combines both qualitative and quantitative approaches in a single study to provide a more comprehensive understanding of the research problem. It is particularly useful when the research question requires both numerical data and in-depth exploration of experiences or opinions. Key features of mixed methods research. Integration of both data types. The research uses both quantitative and qualitative data collection and analysis techniques. Sequential or concurrent design. The qualitative and quantitative phases may occur one after the other or at the same time. Comprehensive perspective. It provides a richer, more nuanced understanding of the research question. Common applications in environmental science. Assessing the effectiveness of environmental policies. A study might combine surveys to measure environmental behavior, quantitative, with interviews to understand why certain behaviors exist, qualitative. Community-based environmental management. A researcher may use qualitative interviews with community members and quantitative surveys on resource usage to study the impact of a conservation program. Steps in conducting research. Regardless of the method, all research involves certain fundamental steps. Below is a general overview of these steps. Problem identification. Define the research problem clearly. This step involves identifying a gap in the existing knowledge or an issue that requires investigation. Literature review. Conduct a thorough review of existing literature to understand the current state of knowledge in the field and refine the research problem. Formulation of hypotheses. Develop a hypothesis in quantitative research or research questions in qualitative research that the study will seek to answer. Research design. Choose an appropriate research method, qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods based on the research questions and objectives. Data collection. Use the selected research methods to collect data. This might involve surveys, interviews, experiments, or observations. Data analysis. Analyze the data using appropriate techniques. For quantitative research, this involves statistical analysis. For qualitative research, this involves thematic or content analysis. Interpretation and conclusion. Draw conclusions from the analyzed data, considering the limitations of the study, and answer the research questions or test the hypotheses. Reporting. Write a report or paper that details the research process, methodology, findings, and implications. Previous year questions with answers in years. Question 2023. Which of the following is a method typically used in qualitative research? A. Surveys. B. Statistical analysis. C. Case studies. D. Experiments. Answer. C. Case studies asked in UGC NET Environmental Science 2023. Question 2022. What is the primary goal of quantitative research? A. To understand the meanings and experiences of individuals. B. To explore subjective experiences. C. To generate numerical data for statistical analysis. D. To analyze cultural context. Answer. C. To generate numerical data for statistical analysis asked in UGC NET Environmental Science 2022. Question 2021. Which research method combines both qualitative and quantitative techniques? A. Experimental research. B. Mixed methods research. C. Descriptive research. D. Survey research. Answer. B. Mixed methods research asked in UGC NET Environmental Science 2021. Question 2020. What is a key feature of qualitative research? A. It emphasizes numerical analysis. B. It involves hypothesis testing. C. It focuses on understanding experiences and meanings. D. It uses random sampling. Answer. C. It focuses on understanding experiences and meanings. Asked in UGC NET Environmental Science 2020. Conclusion. Understanding research methods is essential for conducting rigorous scientific investigations in environmental science. Both qualitative and quantitative methods offer distinct advantages, and mixed methods approaches provide a holistic perspective on complex research problems. A solid grasp of these methods will not only help in crafting sound research but also in navigating UGC NET JRF environmental science questions. Always remember to choose the right method based on your research objectives and the nature of the data you wish to gather. You said. Positivism and post. Positivistic approach to research. NO table ChatGPT said. Positivism and post-positivistic approach to research. In the field of environmental science and research methodology, understanding the philosophical underpinnings of research approaches is vital for grasping how scientific knowledge is generated and interpreted. Positivism and post-positivism are two major philosophical approaches that shape how researchers design and conduct studies, particularly in fields where empirical data collection and analysis are central. Both approaches deal with the ways in which knowledge is acquired, but they differ in their assumptions about the nature of reality and the methods used to investigate it. Below is a detailed exploration of these two approaches and their application to research. Positivism, an overview. Positivism is a research philosophy rooted in the belief that reality is objective, observable, and measurable. It holds that the natural world operates according to fixed laws and that these laws can be discovered through empirical observation and scientific methods. This approach emphasizes quantitative data collection and analysis, and it is most commonly associated with the natural sciences, though it can also be applied in environmental research. Key features of positivism. Objective reality. Positivism assumes that an objective reality exists, independent of human perception. This reality can be discovered through sensory observation and measurement. Empiricism. Knowledge is based on sensory experience, and only observable phenomena can be studied scientifically. Quantitative research. Positivist research often involves experiments, surveys, and statistical analysis to quantify variables and establish causal relationships. Hypothesis testing. Positivism is rooted in the scientific method, where hypotheses are formed and tested against empirical data. Predictability. Positivists believe that through observation and experimentation, researchers can predict future occurrences or behaviors with a high degree of certainty. Application in environmental science. In environmental science, a positivist approach might involve using quantitative data to measure pollution levels, species distribution, or climate variables. For example, researchers may use instruments to quantify atmospheric pollutants and establish causal relationships between pollution levels and health impacts. The goal is to discover general laws or patterns in nature that can be used for prediction and policy making. Example of positivist research. A researcher studying air pollution in an urban area might collect quantitative data on air quality using air monitoring stations. Statistical techniques would then be used to test hypotheses about the relationship between pollution levels and respiratory diseases in the population. Post-positivism, an overview. Post-positivism is a response to the limitations of positivism. While it retains many of the empirical methods of positivism, it acknowledges that our understanding of reality is always imperfect and incomplete. Post-positivism suggests that researchers can never fully capture the totality of reality but can only approximate it through observation and analysis. This approach is more flexible than positivism, and it is often seen as a bridge between quantitative and qualitative research methods. Key features of post-positivism. Reality is imperfectly understood. Post-positivism argues that reality exists, but our understanding of it is always limited and influenced by our perceptions and interpretations. Critical realism. It recognizes that there are underlying structures and causes in the world, but these cannot be directly observed. Researchers must infer them through data analysis. Theory Ladeness of observation. Post-positivism recognizes that what we observe is influenced by our theoretical assumptions, cultural backgrounds, and values. Reflexivity. Researchers must be aware of their role in shaping research outcomes. The influence of personal biases and perspectives on the research process must be critically examined. Mixed methods. Post-positivism is often associated with the use of both quantitative and qualitative research methods, as it recognizes the value of multiple perspectives in understanding complex phenomena. Application in environmental science. In environmental science, post-positivism allows for a more holistic understanding of environmental issues by combining quantitative data with qualitative insights. Researchers might use quantitative techniques to measure pollutant concentrations while also conducting interviews or focus groups to understand how people perceive environmental issues and how these perceptions influence their behavior. Example of post-positivist research. A study on climate change adaptation in a coastal community might combine statistical analysis of sea level rise with qualitative interviews of local residents. This approach would help to understand not only the objective impacts of climate change but also the subjective experiences and adaptive strategies of the community. Differences between positivism and post-positivism. While both positivism and post-positivism focus on empirical observation, they differ significantly in their approach to understanding reality. Nature of reality. Positivism assumes an objective, measurable reality that can be discovered through scientific observation. Post-positivism argues that reality exists, but our understanding of it is always imperfect and influenced by human perception. Approach to knowledge. Positivism. Knowledge is certain, derived from observable facts and data. Post-positivism. Knowledge is tentative, recognizing that data alone cannot provide complete truth. Role of theory. Positivism. Theory is deductive, meaning that hypotheses are derived from existing theories and tested empirically. Post-positivism. Theory is more inductive, with hypotheses being modified as new data is collected. Research methods. Positivism primarily relies on quantitative methods such as experiments, surveys, and statistical analysis. Post-positivism employs a mix of quantitative and qualitative methods, allowing for a more comprehensive understanding of phenomena. Objectivity. Positivism. Researchers strive for complete objectivity, with minimal influence of personal biases. Post-positivism acknowledges that complete objectivity is impossible, and researchers must recognize and address their own biases. Previous year questions with answers in years. Question 2023. Which of the following best describes the post-positivist approach? A. Knowledge is certain and objective. B. Reality is objective, and we can fully understand it. C. Reality exists but is imperfectly understood. D. All knowledge is subjective and based on personal experience. Answer. C. Reality exists but is imperfectly understood. Asked in UGC NET Environmental Science 2023. Question 2022. The positivist approach to research primarily relies on A. Subjective experiences. B. Empirical observation and measurement. C. Personal interviews. D. Participant observation. Answer B. Empirical observation and measurement. Asked in UGC Net Environmental Science 2022. Question 2021. What is a key difference between positivism and postpositivism? A. Positivism acknowledges the limitations of human understanding, whereas postpositivism does not. B. Postpositivism suggests that reality is fully objective, while positivism does not. C. Postpositivism recognizes the role of theory in shaping observations, while positivism focuses solely on objective facts. D. None of the above. Answer C. Postpositivism recognizes the role of theory in shaping observations, while positivism focuses solely on objective facts. Asked in UGC Net Environmental Science 2021. Conclusion. The debate between positivism and postpositivism represents a critical aspect of research philosophy. While positivism champions the belief in an objective, observable reality that can be studied using quantitative methods, postpositivism offers a more nuanced view, acknowledging that reality can never be fully understood, and thus encourages a combination of quantitative and qualitative approaches to better approximate the truth. For environmental science research, both approaches have valuable applications, and the choice between them depends on the research questions, goals, and nature of the study. You said. Methods of research. Experimental. ChatGPT said. Experimental methods of research. Experimental research is one of the most fundamental and widely used research methods, particularly in fields such as environmental science and other natural sciences. It is characterized by the manipulation of variables to establish causal relationships and control for external factors that may influence the outcome of a study. In experimental research, the researcher typically controls or manipulates one or more independent variables and observes the effect on the dependent variables while keeping other potential influencing factors constant. Key features of experimental research. Manipulation of variables. The hallmark of experimental research is the manipulation of independent variables to observe the effect on dependent variables. The researcher sets up conditions under which changes are made to the independent variable, for example, temperature, light, chemical concentration, and the impact of these changes is observed and measured in the dependent variable, such as plant growth, chemical reaction rate, etc. Control group and experimental group. Control group, a group that does not receive the experimental treatment or manipulation. This group is used as a benchmark to compare the effects of the experimental treatment. Experimental group, a group that is subjected to the manipulation or treatment. The differences between this group and the control group help in understanding the cause and effect relationships. Randomization. Randomization is used in experimental research to eliminate bias. Participants or units are randomly assigned to experimental and control groups to ensure that the results are not influenced by pre-existing differences between the groups. Replication. Repeating the experiment multiple times or using a larger sample size is vital for validity and reliability. Replication helps confirm that the findings are not due to chance and that the results can be generalized. Random sampling. In some experimental designs, particularly in large-scale studies, random sampling helps ensure that the sample selected for the study is representative of the larger population, increasing the external validity of the results. Steps in experimental research. Formulating a hypothesis. The researcher begins by stating a hypothesis, which is a testable prediction about the relationship between variables. For example, in environmental research, a hypothesis might be, increased nitrogen levels in the soil will enhance plant growth. Designing the experiment. The next step involves designing the experiment, which includes selecting the experimental and control groups, deciding on the variables to manipulate, and determining how data will be collected. Key considerations include the independent variable, what is being manipulated, the dependent variable, what is being measured, and any extraneous variables that need to be controlled. Conducting the experiment. During this phase, the experiment is carried out by manipulating the independent variable and observing the effect on the dependent variable. Throughout the process, researchers must ensure the control of extraneous variables to prevent them from confounding the results. Collecting data. Data is collected systematically, often through measurements, observations, or surveys. The data must be accurate and precise to ensure the validity of the conclusions drawn. Analyzing the data. Statistical methods are used to analyze the data and determine whether the changes in the independent variable led to significant changes in the dependent variable. Common statistical tests include t-tests, ANOVA, and regression analysis. Drawing conclusions. After analyzing the data, the researcher draws conclusions about whether the hypothesis was supported. If the experimental group shows a significant difference compared to the control group, the researcher can infer a causal relationship. Reporting results. The findings are then compiled into a report, often including visual aids such as graphs or tables, and submitted for publication or presented to the scientific community. Types of experimental research designs. True experimental design. Involves random assignment of participants to experimental and control groups. This design is considered the gold standard in experimental research because it helps ensure that the groups are equivalent at the start of the study and that any differences observed are due to the manipulation of the independent variable. Quasi-experimental design. A quasi-experiment is used when true randomization is not possible. For example, in some field studies, researchers may not be able to randomly assign subjects to groups. Instead, they use existing groups or conditions to examine cause and effect relationships. While not as rigorous as true experiments, quasi-experimental designs can still provide valuable insights. Factorial design. This design Types of experimental research designs. True experimental design. Involves random assignment of participants to experimental and control groups. This design is considered the gold standard in experimental research because it helps ensure that the groups are equivalent at the start of the study and that any differences observed are due to the manipulation of the independent variable. Quasi-experimental design. A quasi-experiment is used when true randomization is not possible. For example, in some field studies, researchers may not be able to randomly assign subjects to groups. Instead, they use existing groups or conditions to examine cause and effect relationships. While not as rigorous as true experiments, quasi-experimental designs can still provide valuable insights. Factorial design. This design involves manipulating two or more independent variables simultaneously to examine their combined effects on the dependent variable. It is particularly useful for studying interaction effects between variables, which can be complex in environmental research, e.g., the combined effects of temperature and humidity on plant growth. Longitudinal design. In this type of experimental research, the same subjects are studied over a long period of time. This allows researchers to observe changes and trends over time, which is particularly useful in environmental studies where long-term data is essential, such as tracking the effects of climate change on ecosystems. Cross-sectional design. A cross-sectional design examines subjects at a single point in time. This design is often used when the researcher wants to examine differences between groups or variables at a particular moment. Applications of experimental research in environmental science. Experimental research in environmental science can cover a vast array of topics, including the effects of pollutants, climate change, biodiversity conservation, and ecosystem health. Some examples of experimental studies in environmental science include pollution and plant growth. Researchers may manipulate the levels of pollutants, e.g., carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, in the environment to observe their effect on plant growth or crop yield. This experimental design helps in understanding the impact of air pollution on agricultural productivity. Ecosystem response to environmental stressors. An experiment might examine how different species in an ecosystem respond to temperature changes or drought conditions. Types of experimental research designs. True experimental design involves random assignment of participants to experimental and control groups. This design is considered the gold standard in experimental research because it helps ensure that the groups are equivalent at the start of the study and that any differences observed are due to the manipulation of the independent variable. Quasi-experimental design. A quasi-experiment is used when true randomization is not possible. For example, in some field studies, researchers may not be able to randomly assign subjects to groups. Instead, they use existing groups or conditions to examine cause and effect relationships. While not as rigorous as true experiments, quasi-experimental designs can still provide valuable insights. Factorial design. This design involves manipulating two or more independent variables simultaneously to examine their combined effects on the dependent variable. It is particularly useful for studying interaction effects between variables, which can be complex in environmental research, e.g., the combined effects of temperature and humidity on plant growth. Longitudinal design. In this type of experimental research, the same subjects are studied over a long period of time. This allows researchers to observe changes and trends over time, which is particularly useful in environmental studies where long-term data is essential, such as tracking the effects of climate change on ecosystems. Cross-sectional design. A cross-sectional design examines subjects at a single point in time. This design is often used when the researcher wants to examine differences between groups or variables at a particular moment. Applications of experimental research in environmental science. Experimental research in environmental science can cover a vast array of topics, including the effects of pollutants, climate change, biodiversity conservation, and ecosystem health. Some examples of experimental studies in environmental science include pollution and plant growth. Researchers may manipulate the levels of pollutants, e.g., carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, in the environment to observe their effect on plant growth or crop yield. This experimental design helps in understanding the impact of air pollution on agricultural productivity. Ecosystem response to environmental stressors. An experiment might examine how different species in an ecosystem respond to temperature changes or drought conditions. By manipulating these stressors in controlled settings, researchers can infer how climate change may affect biodiversity. Wastewater treatment. Experimental studies may test the effectiveness of different wastewater treatment methods, e.g., biofilters, constructed wetlands, on water quality. These studies provide insights into sustainable practices for water purification. Strengths and weaknesses of experimental research. Strengths. Causal relationships. Experimental research is one of the few methodologies that can establish cause and effect relationships. Control over variables. The ability to control extraneous variables increases the internal validity of the study. Replicability. Well-designed experiments can be replicated by other researchers, which helps confirm the results and their generalizability. Weaknesses. Artificial settings. Laboratory-based experiments may lack ecological validity if they are conducted in artificial environments that do not represent real-world conditions. Ethical concerns. Certain experimental manipulations, such as exposure to pollutants or invasive species control, may raise ethical concerns, particularly in environmental research. Cost and time. Experiments, especially those involving large-scale field studies, can be expensive and time-consuming. Previous year questions with answers in years. Question 2023. What is the primary advantage of using an experimental research design? A. It establishes cause and effect relationships. B. It relies on subjective data. C. It does not require a control group. D. It is only useful in laboratory settings. Answer. A. It establishes cause and effect relationships. Asked in UGC Net Environmental Science 2023. Question 2022. In experimental research, the group that receives the treatment or manipulation is called a control group. B. Experimental group. C. Randomized group. D. Subject group. Answer. B. Experimental group. Asked in UGC Net Environmental Science 2022. Question 2021. Which of the following is true about randomization in experimental research? A. It helps eliminate bias by ensuring that each subject has an equal chance of being assigned to any group. B. It is only used in quasi-experimental designs. C. It is not essential for the validity of the experiment. D. It reduces the number of variables to be tested. Answer. A. It helps eliminate bias by ensuring that each subject has an equal chance of being assigned to any group. Asked in UGC Net Environmental Science 2021. Conclusion. Experimental research is essential for establishing cause and effect. D. It C. It is not essential for the. It helps eliminate bias by ensuring that each. Question 2021. Which of the following is true about randomization in experimental research? A. It helps eliminate bias by ensuring that each subject has an equal chance of being assigned to any group. B. It is only used in quasi-experimental designs. C. It is not essential for the validity of the experiment. D. It reduces the number of variables to be tested. Answer. A. It helps eliminate bias by ensuring that each subject has an equal chance of being assigned to any group. Asked in UGC Net Environmental Science 2021. Conclusion. Experimental research is essential for establishing cause and effect relationships in environmental science and other fields. Experimental research is essential for establishing cause and effect relationships in environmental science and other fields. By manipulating variables, controlling extraneous factors, and using statistical analysis, researchers can make accurate inferences about environmental phenomena. The design, execution, and interpretation of experimental research require careful planning and consideration to ensure reliable and valid results. You said, descriptive, ChatGPT said. Descriptive methods of research. Descriptive research is one of the fundamental research methodologies employed in a variety of academic disciplines, including environmental science, social sciences, education, and more. Unlike experimental research, which focuses on manipulating variables to establish causal relationships, descriptive research aims to describe characteristics, phenomena, or conditions as they exist in the present, without manipulating any variables. This type of research is primarily used to gather detailed information about a subject, providing an accurate portrayal of it at a particular moment in time. Key features of descriptive research. Focus on description. The primary objective of descriptive research is to describe the current state of a phenomenon, group, or condition. It is not concerned with why something happens but rather with what exists. For example, a study might describe the distribution of plant species in a particular ecosystem without investigating the reasons behind their distribution. Non-manipulative. Unlike experimental research, descriptive research does not. The primary objective of descriptive research is to describe the descriptive methods of research. Descriptive research is one of the fundamental research methodologies employed in a variety of academic disciplines, including environmental science, social sciences, education, and more. Unlike experimental research, which focuses on manipulating variables to establish causal relationships, descriptive research aims to describe characteristics, phenomena, or conditions as they exist in the present, without manipulating any variables. This type of research is primarily used to gather detailed information about a subject, providing an accurate portrayal of it at a particular moment in time. Key features of descriptive research. Focus on description. The primary objective of descriptive research is to describe the current state of a phenomenon, group, or condition. It is not concerned with why something happens but rather with what exists. For example, a study might describe the distribution of plant species in a particular ecosystem without investigating the reasons behind their distribution. Non-manipulative. Unlike experimental research, descriptive research does not involve manipulating variables. Researchers do not intervene or control conditions. Instead, they observe and report on phenomena as they naturally occur. This is ideal for studying situations where manipulation is either impossible or unethical. Data collection methods. Descriptive research relies on various methods of data collection such as surveys, questionnaires, observations, and case studies. In environmental science, this could involve taking environmental measurements, e.g., air or water quality, or cataloging biodiversity in a specific region. Quantitative and qualitative data. Descriptive research can involve both quantitative data, such as numerical measurements of pollution levels, temperature, etc., and qualitative data, such as interviews or descriptive observations about an ecosystem. The nature of the data depends on the research question and the phenomenon being studied. Cross-sectional nature. Descriptive studies often take a cross-sectional approach, meaning they provide a snapshot of the phenomenon at a specific point in time. However, longitudinal descriptive research may also track changes over time to understand trends and patterns. Steps in conducting descriptive research. Defining the research problem. The first step is to clearly define what you are seeking to describe. The problem should be focused and specific, such as, what is the distribution of bird species in a specific forest area? This ensures that the study is relevant and manageable. Selecting the sample. In descriptive research, the sample is selected based on the population or phenomenon being studied. The sample should be representative of the larger population to ensure that the findings can be generalized. For example, if studying plant diversity, the sample might consist of various plots within a specific forest. Choosing the method of data collection. Depending on the research question, the researcher will select the most appropriate method for gathering data. Common methods include observations, surveys, and interviews. In environmental science, researchers may use environmental sensors, surveys, and fieldwork to collect data on ecosystems or pollution levels. Collecting data. The next step is to gather the data according to the selected methods. This can involve conducting fieldwork, recording observations, distributing surveys, or analyzing existing records. In some cases, researchers may also use secondary data that was collected by other researchers or organizations. Analyzing data. After data collection, the researcher will organize and analyze the data. In descriptive research, this may involve basic statistical measures such as averages, percentages, and frequencies for quantitative data. Qualitative data may be analyzed through content analysis, categorizing responses or observations. Reporting findings. The results of descriptive research are typically presented as detailed descriptions of the phenomenon, along with relevant statistics or charts. The aim is to provide an accurate and comprehensive picture of the subject under study. Types of descriptive research. Case studies. A case study is an in-depth, detailed examination of a specific individual, group, or event. In environmental science, a case study might examine the impacts of deforestation on a particular ecosystem, providing detailed insights into the environmental, social, and economic consequences. Observational research. In observational research, the researcher observes a phenomenon of interest in its natural environment without intervening or manipulating variables. For instance, researchers might study animal behavior or plant growth in their natural habitats. This method can provide rich, detailed data that would be difficult to obtain through experimental methods. Survey research. Surveys are commonly used in descriptive research to collect data from large groups of people or organizations. In environmental science, a survey might ask residents about their attitudes toward climate change or their participation in recycling programs. Surveys are typically structured with both open-ended and closed-ended questions to gather a variety of data. Correlational research. While correlational research can be seen as a subtype of descriptive research, it involves examining relationships between variables without establishing causal effects. For example, researchers might explore the relationship between air quality and asthma rates in a city without manipulating air quality levels. Applications of descriptive research in environmental science. Biodiversity assessment. Descriptive research is widely used in environmental science to assess biodiversity in a given area. By cataloging the number and types of species in an ecosystem, researchers can monitor the health of the environment and identify areas of concern, such as regions with declining species populations. Pollution monitoring. Researchers may conduct descriptive studies to measure levels of various pollutants, e.g., carbon emissions, heavy metals in water, soil, or air. These studies help in documenting the current state of environmental pollution, identifying trends, and providing baseline data for future studies. Ecosystem mapping. In ecology, descriptive research is used to map ecosystems and their components. For example, researchers might conduct field studies to observe and document different types of vegetation in a forest, or to describe the habitats of endangered species. Climate change impact studies. Descriptive research plays an important role in documenting the current effects of climate change. By studying phenomena such as changes in temperature patterns, sea levels, and species migration, researchers can describe the impacts of climate change and track how they evolve over time. Strengths and weaknesses of descriptive research. Strengths. Detailed insights. Descriptive research provides rich, detailed information about a phenomenon, offering a comprehensive understanding of its current state. Wide applicability. It can be used in a variety of contexts, including both natural and social sciences. Non-invasive. Since it does not require manipulation of variables, it is less likely to cause ethical issues. Cost-effective. Descriptive research often involves less expensive methodologies, especially when using existing data or conducting surveys. Weaknesses. No causal inference. Descriptive research does not establish cause and effect relationships. It only provides a snapshot of a phenomenon without exploring the reasons behind it. Limited generalizability. Findings from a specific case or sample may not always be applicable to broader populations or different settings. Bias risk. If data collection is not handled carefully, observer bias or survey bias may affect the results, leading to inaccurate conclusions. Previous year questions with answers in years. Question 2023. Which of the following is the main focus of descriptive research? A. To establish causal relationships. B. To describe characteristics or phenomena as they exist. C. To test hypotheses about relationships. D. To predict future events. Answer. B. To describe characteristics or phenomena as they exist. Asked in UGC Net Environmental Science 2023. Question 2022. Which research method is commonly used to examine the distribution of plant species in a forest ecosystem? A. Experimental research. B. Descriptive research. C. Correlational research. D. Experimental design. Answer. B. Descriptive research. Asked in UGC Net Environmental Science 2022. Question 2021. Which of the following data collection methods is most commonly used in descriptive research? A. Controlled experiments. B. Surveys and observations. C. Longitudinal studies. D. Randomized trials. Answer. B. Surveys and observations. Asked in UGC Net Environmental Science 2021. Conclusion. Descriptive research is a critical method for gathering detailed, systematic information about a phenomenon without manipulating variables. In environmental science, it provides valuable insights into biodiversity, pollution, climate change, and other ecological issues. While it does not offer explanations for why things occur, it creates a foundational understanding that can guide further experimental or explanatory research. By documenting the present state of the environment, descriptive research plays a vital role in conservation and policy-making efforts. You said, historical, ChatGPT said. Historical methods of research. Historical research is a method used to investigate, analyze, and interpret past events, people, ideas, or phenomena. It is grounded in the belief that understanding past occurrences is essential for comprehending present conditions and predicting future trends. In this research method, the focus is on examining past records, documents, artifacts, and other forms of evidence to build a coherent and objective account of historical events. The main aim of historical research is not merely to describe the past but to interpret its significance, how it shaped contemporary life, and what lessons can be learned from it. This method is widely employed in fields like history, sociology, political science, and environmental science when studying the historical impact of environmental policies, species extinction, or deforestation over time. Key features of historical research: analysis of past events. Historical research primarily focuses on studying events, individuals, and movements that occurred in the past. It can span a range of time periods, from ancient history to recent past events, depending on the research question. Use of primary and secondary sources. Primary sources are direct or first-hand evidence from the time period under study, such as letters, diaries, government documents, or newspaper articles. In environmental science, primary sources could include original reports on environmental conditions or early scientific studies. Secondary sources, on the other hand, are interpretations or analyses of primary data, such as books, academic articles, or documentaries written by other researchers. Contextual understanding. Historical research places events or phenomena in the context of their time. Researchers attempt to understand the social, political, or economic environment in which a particular event or phenomenon occurred. For instance, an environmental historian might study how historical agricultural practices influenced deforestation patterns in ancient civilizations. Chronological approach. Historical research typically follows a chronological sequence, tracing the development of a subject over time. This approach helps researchers see how events unfold and how one development may have influenced another. Interpretation of evidence. After collecting the data, historical researchers work to interpret the evidence, creating a narrative that not only describes the events but also provides insight into their causes, implications, and significance. Historical research aims to answer why events occurred and how they shaped present-day understanding. Steps in conducting historical research: defining the research problem. The researcher starts by clearly defining what historical phenomenon or event they wish to investigate. The problem must be precise and researchable, such as, what were the impacts of industrialization on the environment in the 19th century? Collecting data. Historical researchers gather primary and secondary sources of data. Primary sources could include official records, letters, photographs, or legal documents, while secondary sources could include history books, journals, or research articles. In environmental science, primary sources might include early records of air quality measurements, historical land use records, or data on biodiversity. Evaluating the sources. Not all sources are equally reliable. Researchers critically assess the authenticity, bias, and credibility of each source. For example, a government report from the 1800s may be a reliable source, but it may also reflect political biases of the time. Analyzing data. Once the data is collected, it is analyzed to uncover patterns, connections, and meaning. In historical research, this involves understanding the context of the sources, comparing conflicting narratives, and synthesizing a cohesive understanding of past events. Drawing conclusions. Historical researchers then interpret the findings, placing them within the context of their significance. The goal is to understand the implications of past events and the lessons that can be drawn for present and future issues. Reporting findings. The final step is to report the findings in a structured manner, often in the form of research papers, articles, or books. These reports typically present the findings chronologically, analyzing the events or phenomena from multiple perspectives to offer a balanced and comprehensive understanding. Types of historical research. Descriptive historical research. Descriptive historical research seeks to narrate or describe past events in a clear and detailed manner. It does not focus on explaining or interpreting events but rather on presenting a chronological account. For instance, a historical study of the Industrial Revolution may simply document key facts about the period, such as technological innovations, social impacts, and the rise of factories. Interpretive historical research. Interpretive historical research goes beyond mere description to explain and interpret past events. It focuses on causes, consequences, and implications of historical occurrences. Researchers using this approach may explore, for instance, how industrialization contributed to environmental degradation in the 19th century or how it led to the rise of modern environmentalism. Comparative historical research. In comparative historical research, two or more historical phenomena are compared to understand their similarities, differences, and interconnections. For example, a researcher might compare the historical impacts of deforestation in two different countries or regions to understand how political, social, or environmental policies influence ecological outcomes. Historical case studies. In case study research, a particular historical event, period, or phenomenon is studied in depth. This approach provides detailed insights into specific historical instances and can be used to understand complex historical interactions. A case study in environmental science could involve examining a single pollution event and its long-term ecological consequences. Applications of historical research in environmental science, climate change and historical weather patterns. Researchers can study historical weather records to understand long-term trends in climate change. Historical data on temperature fluctuations, extreme weather events, or ice core samples can provide insights into the natural cycles of climate change and how human activities might be contributing to more recent warming trends. Environmental policies and their evolution. Historical research is often used to analyze the evolution of environmental policies. By examining how laws regarding air quality, deforestation, or wildlife protection have developed over time, researchers can understand the shifts in societal attitudes toward the environment and assess the effectiveness of past policy interventions. Historical environmental impact studies. By studying historical environmental changes, such as the impact of industrialization, urbanization, or colonial agriculture, researchers can trace the development of environmental issues. For example, historical research might reveal how early agricultural practices led to soil erosion or deforestation, providing critical insights into sustainable practices for the future. Biodiversity conservation. By investigating historical records of species populations, migration patterns, and habitat destruction, researchers can identify past trends in biodiversity loss. This can inform current conservation strategies by showing which ecosystems or species were previously at risk and the measures that were, or were not, effective. Strengths and weaknesses of historical research. Strengths. Rich contextual understanding. Historical research provides deep contextual understanding of events or phenomena by placing them in their full historical and social context. Prevention of historical repetition. By analyzing past mistakes or successes, historical research helps avoid the repetition of errors in current or future contexts, particularly in environmental policy. Wide scope. It allows researchers to study a vast range of phenomena and offers valuable insights across multiple disciplines, from history and political science to environmental science. Weaknesses. Incomplete data. Historical data may be incomplete or fragmented, making it challenging to draw definitive conclusions. Many records may have been lost, destroyed, or altered over time. Subjectivity and interpretation. The interpretation of historical events can sometimes be biased by the historian's own perspective, leading to skewed or incomplete narratives. No experimental control. Unlike experimental research, historical research does not involve manipulation of variables, meaning that cause and effect relationships can be difficult to establish with certainty. Previous year questions with answers in years. Question 2023. Which of the following is the primary objective of historical research? A. To describe historical events. B. To explain the causes and effects of historical events. C. To conduct experiments based on historical data. D. To develop future policies based on past events. Answer. B. To explain the causes and effects of historical events, asked in UGC Net Environmental Science 2023. Question 2022. What is the primary data source for historical research? A. Observations in a controlled setting. B. Historical records and documents. C. Surveys and questionnaires. D. Experimental setups. Answer. B. Historical records and documents, asked in UGC Net Environmental Science 2022. Question 2021. Historical research is primarily concerned with A. Predicting future trends. B. Understanding and interpreting past events. C. Experimenting to find new solutions. D. Testing hypotheses. Answer. B. Understanding and interpreting past events, asked in UGC Net Environmental Science 2021. Conclusion. Historical research is an invaluable tool for understanding the past and its impact on the present. By analyzing historical records, documents, and other data sources, researchers can gain deep insights into the development of various phenomena, including environmental issues, and help inform contemporary decision-making. Through its detailed examination of past events, this method contributes to the preservation of knowledge and provides a framework for addressing current and future challenges. You said. Qualitative ChatGPT said. Qualitative methods of research. Qualitative research is an approach used to explore complex phenomena that cannot be easily quantified. Unlike quantitative research, which focuses on numerical data and statistical analysis, qualitative research aims to understand the underlying meanings, experiences, and concepts that define social, behavioral, or environmental phenomena. It is particularly useful when the objective is to explore how and why certain phenomena occur, rather than simply measuring their frequency or size. Qualitative research is often employed in social sciences, psychology, education, anthropology, environmental science, and sociology, among others, where the emphasis is on understanding human experiences, behaviors, perceptions, and social dynamics in depth. Key characteristics of qualitative research: subjectivity and context. Qualitative research emphasizes the importance of context and the subjectivity of experiences. It acknowledges that reality is interpreted by individuals in different ways depending on their cultural, social, and environmental contexts. In-depth exploration. It involves detailed exploration of a specific phenomenon. Researchers aim to understand the complexity of the phenomenon by considering the perspectives of individuals or groups involved. For example, in environmental science, qualitative methods can be used to explore local perceptions of environmental changes like deforestation or pollution. Flexible and adaptive approach. Qualitative research designs are often flexible and adaptive, allowing researchers to make adjustments to their research methods as new insights emerge during the study. This is in contrast to quantitative methods, which are more rigid and require a set hypothesis before data collection. Non-numerical data. The data in qualitative research is non-numerical and often consists of words, images, sounds, or observations. Examples of qualitative data include interview transcripts, field notes, photographs, and audio or video recordings. Inductive reasoning. Qualitative research typically follows an inductive approach, meaning that it begins with observations and moves toward the development of theories or patterns based on the collected data, rather than testing predefined hypotheses. Types of qualitative research methods. Case study research. A case study is an in-depth, detailed investigation of a particular individual, group, event, or phenomenon. It is often used when the researcher wants to explore a complex issue in its real-life context. For example, an environmental researcher might conduct a case study on the effects of a particular environmental disaster on a community, focusing on both the immediate and long-term impacts. Phenomenological research. Phenomenology aims to understand lived experiences from the perspective of those who have experienced a particular phenomenon. It focuses on describing the essence of the phenomenon as it is perceived by individuals. For example, a researcher may study the lived experiences of individuals who have survived a natural disaster to understand how their perceptions of safety, vulnerability, and recovery are shaped by the event. Grounded theory. Grounded theory is a method that involves generating theory from qualitative data. Researchers collect data through interviews or observations and then analyze it to identify patterns and develop a theory grounded in the data. For instance, in environmental science, grounded theory might be used to understand how local communities develop sustainable agricultural practices in response to environmental challenges, such as droughts or soil degradation. Ethnography. Ethnographic research involves studying people in their natural environment. The researcher often immerses themselves in the community, spending extended periods of time to observe behaviors, rituals, and interactions. It is commonly used in anthropology and sociology but also in environmental research to study local ecological knowledge and practices. For example, an ethnographer might live in a rural village to study how its inhabitants interact with the local ecosystem, focusing on indigenous environmental knowledge and practices. Narrative inquiry. Narrative inquiry focuses on stories as a way of understanding the experiences of individuals or groups. It often involves collecting personal narratives, life histories, or autobiographies. In environmental studies, this method could involve collecting stories from individuals who have been directly affected by environmental degradation or climate change, in order to understand their perspectives and how they perceive environmental risks. Action research. Action research is a participatory approach that involves researchers working with participants to solve problems or improve practices. It is often used in educational settings or community-based research. In environmental contexts, action research might be used to collaborate with communities in addressing environmental issues, such as waste management or conservation efforts. Data collection methods in qualitative research. Interviews. Interviews are one of the most common methods of data collection in qualitative research. They can be structured, semi-structured, or unstructured, depending on the level of flexibility desired by the researcher. For example, a researcher might conduct semi-structured interviews with environmental activists to understand their motivations and perceptions regarding environmental policies. Focus groups. Focus groups are group discussions that are led by a researcher to explore participants' attitudes, opinions, and perceptions about a particular topic. The group dynamics can often lead to deeper insights than individual interviews. In environmental science, focus groups might be used to understand the community's views on issues such as climate change or conservation. Observations. Participant observation involves the researcher immersing themselves in the environment they are studying and taking notes on their observations. This method allows researchers to gain a more holistic understanding of the phenomena they are studying. For example, an environmental researcher might observe how farmers use pesticides in a particular region to understand the impacts on the local ecosystem. Document analysis. Document analysis involves studying existing documents such as reports, diaries, newspapers, or historical records. This method is useful for researching past events or trends, as well as understanding the narratives created by different groups. For instance, a qualitative researcher might analyze policy documents to assess how environmental laws have evolved over time and their impact on local communities. Data analysis in qualitative research. Thematic analysis. Thematic analysis involves identifying and analyzing patterns or themes within the data. Researchers often code the data and group it into categories that reflect significant ideas or concepts. For instance, a thematic analysis of interviews with environmental activists might reveal common themes around issues like climate justice, policy reform, or sustainability. Content analysis. Content analysis is a method used to analyze textual, visual, or audio content. The researcher systematically examines the content to identify particular patterns or trends. It can be used to study how certain topics or issues are portrayed in media, such as news coverage of environmental disasters. Narrative analysis. Narrative analysis focuses on the stories told by participants, examining how they construct meaning from their experiences. This method is often used in research focusing on individual or group experiences. For instance, a researcher could analyze narratives from people who have been affected by environmental hazards to understand how they make sense of their experiences. Advantages of qualitative research. Depth and detail. Qualitative research allows researchers to explore phenomena in depth, providing rich, detailed data that quantitative methods may not uncover. Flexibility. The research design is flexible and adaptive, allowing for changes during the research process based on emerging insights. Contextual understanding. It provides a holistic understanding of the phenomenon by considering the broader context and individual subjective experiences. Human element. Qualitative research focuses on human experiences, emotions, and perceptions, providing insights into areas such as behavior, attitudes, and social interactions. Limitations of qualitative research. Subjectivity. Because qualitative research relies heavily on interpretation, there can be a higher degree of subjectivity, potentially leading to researcher bias. Time-consuming. Data collection and analysis in qualitative research can be time-consuming, especially when dealing with large amounts of textual or narrative data. Limited generalizability. Due to the focus on specific contexts and small sample sizes, qualitative research may not be as easily generalizable to larger populations. Difficult to replicate. Because of its flexible and adaptive nature, qualitative research is often difficult to replicate, making it harder to verify or compare results across studies. Previous year questions with answers in years. Question 2023. Which of the following is the primary characteristic of qualitative research? A. Emphasis on quantifiable data. B. Focus on subjective experiences. C. Use of statistical methods. D. Measurement of physical variables. Answer. B. Focus on subjective experiences, asked in UGC NET Environmental Science 2023. Question 2022. In qualitative research, which of the following methods is most commonly used for data collection? A. Surveys. B. Experiments. C. Interviews. D. Mathematical models. Answer. C. Interviews, asked in UGC NET Environmental Science 2022. Question 2021. Which of the following qualitative research methods involves collecting data through direct involvement in the community being studied? A. Case study. B. Ethnography. C. Grounded theory. D. Experimental research. Answer. B. Ethnography, asked in UGC NET Environmental Science 2021. Conclusion. Qualitative research is a powerful tool for understanding complex phenomena, particularly when the objective is to explore people's experiences, perceptions, and the meaning they attach to their surroundings or actions. While it may not produce the statistical generalizations that quantitative research offers, qualitative research provides deep, rich insights into human behavior and societal issues, especially in fields like environmental science. Through various methods like interviews, case studies, and ethnography, researchers can uncover critical information that can inform policy, practice, and theoretical development. You said. Quantitative methods. ChatGPT said. Quantitative methods of research. Quantitative research is a systematic investigation that primarily focuses on gathering numerical data and applying statistical methods to understand relationships, test hypotheses, and make predictions. Unlike qualitative research, which is more subjective and exploratory, quantitative research is objective, measurable, and relies heavily on data analysis to uncover patterns and trends. Quantitative research is widely used in fields like social sciences, natural sciences, healthcare, business, and environmental science to quantify problems and outcomes, ensuring the findings are generalizable to larger populations. Key characteristics of quantitative research: objective and systematic. Quantitative research is based on an objective approach, where the researcher maintains a neutral stance, aiming to minimize bias. The data collection process is systematic and follows predefined protocols. Focus on numerical data. This type of research relies on numerical data and measurable variables. The results are presented in the form of statistics, making it easier to compare, contrast, and analyze the relationships between variables. Hypothesis testing. Quantitative research often begins with a hypothesis, which is then tested through the collection and analysis of data. The goal is to confirm or reject the hypothesis based on empirical evidence. Replicability. The methods used in quantitative research are structured in such a way that the study can be replicated by other researchers, ensuring the validity and reliability of the findings. Statistical analysis. Statistical tools and techniques, such as mean, median, mode, standard deviation, and regression analysis, are used to interpret the data and establish relationships between variables. Types of quantitative research methods. Descriptive research. Descriptive research involves summarizing or describing characteristics of a phenomenon without influencing it. It provides a clear picture of what exists and allows the researcher to document relationships or patterns. This method is often used when the objective is to quantify the frequency, amount, or distribution of specific variables. For example, in environmental science, descriptive research could involve documenting the number of species in a given habitat or the level of pollution in various geographic locations. Correlational research. Correlational research seeks to identify the relationship between two or more variables. Unlike experimental research, it does not attempt to determine causality, but rather examines the degree of association between variables. The results can show if variables are positively or negatively correlated or if there is no relationship. For example, a study may examine the relationship between air pollution and respiratory diseases in a population. If a positive correlation is found, it indicates that higher levels of pollution are associated with higher rates of respiratory diseases, but it does not prove causality. Experimental research. In experimental research, the researcher manipulates one variable, the independent variable, to observe its effect on another variable, the dependent variable, while controlling other factors. This method is considered the most rigorous and is used to establish cause and effect relationships. For example, in environmental science, an experiment might examine the effect of different fertilizer types, independent variable, on crop yield, dependent variable. By controlling other factors such as water, light, and temperature, the researcher can establish a causal relationship. Quasi-experimental research. Quasi-experimental research is similar to experimental research, but it lacks the element of random assignment to different experimental groups. Although this method may still involve manipulation of an independent variable, it is less rigorous than true experimental research. For example, a study might examine the effects of In experimental research, the researcher manipulates one variable, the independent variable, to observe its effect on another variable, the dependent variable, while controlling other factors. This method is considered the most rigorous and is used to establish cause and effect relationships. For example, in environmental science, an experiment might examine the effect of different fertilizer types, independent variable, on crop yield, dependent variable. By controlling other factors such as water, light, and temperature, the researcher can establish a causal relationship. Quasi-experimental research. Quasi-experimental research is similar to experimental research, but it lacks the element of random assignment to different experimental groups. Although this method may still involve manipulation of an independent variable, it is less rigorous than true experimental research. For example, a study might examine the effects of environmental policies implemented in certain regions but without random assignment of regions to control in experimental groups. Longitudinal research. Longitudinal research involves studying the same group of individuals or phenomena over a prolonged period. This type of research helps identify trends, changes, or patterns over time. In environmental studies, longitudinal research might track climate change and its effects on biodiversity over several decades, providing valuable insights into the long-term consequences of environmental shifts. Cross-sectional research. Cross-sectional research collects data at a single point in time, offering a snapshot of a phenomenon or group. Unlike longitudinal research, cross-sectional studies do not track changes over time. For example, a study might examine water quality across several rivers at one point in time, comparing factors like pH levels, pollutant concentration, and species diversity across different locations. Data collection methods in quantitative research, surveys and questionnaires. Surveys and questionnaires are widely used to gather large amounts of data from participants. They are structured, often using closed-ended questions that produce quantitative data. For example, an environmental survey might ask respondents about their views on climate change, with options like strongly agree, neutral, disagree, and strongly disagree. The responses are then coded numerically for analysis. Experiments. In experimental research, data is collected through controlled experiments. Researchers manipulate the independent variable and measure the dependent variable using precise instruments. For example, in a study on air pollution, an experiment may measure pollutant levels before and after a new regulatory policy is enforced. Observations. Observations can also be a quantitative method if they involve systematic counting or measurement of specific behaviors or events. For example, an environmental study might involve counting the number of vehicles passing through a certain area to assess traffic congestion and its effect on air quality. Secondary data. Quantitative research often uses secondary data from existing sources, such as government reports, databases, or scientific publications. This data may already be organized in a way that is conducive to statistical analysis. Statistical tools for data analysis. Descriptive statistics. Descriptive statistics summarize the main features of a dataset and include measures such as the mean, median, mode, and standard deviation. Example, in a study measuring forest density, descriptive statistics could provide an average tree count per hectare. Inferential statistics. Inferential statistics allow researchers to make predictions or inferences about a larger population based on a sample. Common techniques include hypothesis testing, confidence intervals, and regression analysis. Example, researchers may use regression analysis to predict how temperature changes will affect species migration. Chi-square test. The chi-square test is used to assess whether there is a significant association between categorical variables. Example, a chi-square test could be used to examine the relationship between different waste management methods, recycling, composting, etc., and waste reduction in various regions. T-test. A t-test compares the means of two groups to determine if there is a statistically significant difference between them. Example, a t-test could be used to compare pollution levels before and after the implementation of a new environmental policy. ANOVA, analysis of variance. ANOVA is used when comparing the means of three or more groups to see if there are any statistically significant differences. Example, ANOVA could be used to compare soil fertility in three different agricultural regions to see if there are significant differences. Advantages of quantitative research, objective and precise. The use of numbers in statistical analysis allows for objective conclusions based on empirical data, minimizing researcher bias. Replicability and reliability. Due to its structured nature, quantitative research is highly replicable, which adds to its reliability and scientific validity. Generalizability. The large sample sizes and statistical methods used in quantitative research allow findings to be generalized to broader populations. Clear, quantifiable data. Quantitative data provides clear and precise results, making it easier to compare and analyze variables. Limitations of quantitative research, lack of depth. While quantitative research is excellent for testing hypotheses and measuring variables, it may not fully capture the complexity of human behavior or experiences. Potential for oversimplification. Quantitative research often reduces complex phenomena to numerical values, which may lead to oversimplification or failure to account for important context. Rigidity. Quantitative research methods are more rigid compared to qualitative methods and may not be adaptable when unexpected data emerges. Previous year questions with answers in years. Question 2023. Which of the following is a characteristic of quantitative research? A. Subjective interpretation of data. B. Use of numerical data. C. Flexible data collection methods. D. Focus on in-depth understanding of phenomena. Answer. B. Use of numerical data, asked in UGC Net Environmental Science 2023. Question 2022. Which statistical method is used to compare the means of more than two groups? A. T-test. B. Chi-square test. C. ANOVA. D. Regression analysis. Answer. C. ANOVA, asked in UGC Net Environmental Science 2022. Question 2021. A researcher wants to study the impact of fertilizer on crop yield. Which research method would be most appropriate? A. Experimental research. B. Descriptive research. C. Cross-sectional research. D. Longitudinal research. Answer. A. Experimental research, asked in UGC Net Environmental Science 2021. Conclusion. Quantitative research plays a critical role in scientific investigations, particularly in areas such as environmental science, where numerical data and statistical analysis are necessary to assess patterns, test hypotheses, and predict outcomes. By utilizing various methods like descriptive research, correlational studies, and experimental designs, quantitative research provides clear, objective, and generalizable findings that can guide decision-making, policy formation, and further research. You said, steps of research. ChatGPT said, steps of research. Research is a structured process that involves systematic investigation to discover new information, validate existing knowledge, or solve specific problems. The steps of research guide researchers through the process from the initial idea to the final analysis and conclusions. Here's a detailed breakdown of the key steps involved in research. 1. Identification of the research problem. The first step in any research process is identifying a problem or question that needs to be answered. This is the foundation of the entire study, and a clear, focused research problem sets the direction for the research. Example, in environmental science, the research problem could be, how does deforestation in the Amazon impact global biodiversity? 2. Review of literature. Once the research problem is identified, the next step is conducting a literature review. This involves exploring existing studies, theories, and research that are relevant to the topic. The aim is to gain a deeper understanding of the issue, identify gaps in the current knowledge, and build a theoretical framework. Example, reviewing studies on deforestation, biodiversity loss, and climate change to understand the extent of the problem and research that has already been conducted. 3. Formulation of hypothesis or research questions. Based on the literature review, the next step is to formulate a hypothesis for quantitative research or research questions for both quantitative and qualitative research. Hypothesis. This is a testable statement that predicts the relationship between variables. Example, deforestation in the Amazon leads to a significant decline in biodiversity. Research questions. These are more exploratory and open-ended, asking specific questions to guide the investigation. Example, what are the primary causes of deforestation in the Amazon? 4. Research design and methodology. In this step, the researcher decides on the research design and methodology to use. This includes determining whether the study will be qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods and selecting the appropriate methods for data collection and analysis. Quantitative research could involve surveys, experiments, or statistical analysis. Qualitative research could involve interviews, case studies, ethnography, or content analysis. Mixed methods research combines both qualitative and quantitative approaches. The methodology also involves selecting the sample population or subjects, sampling techniques, random, stratified, etc., and the data collection tools, surveys, tests, observation, etc. 5. Data collection. Once the research design is established, the next step is data collection. This involves gathering the necessary information through the chosen methods. Quantitative data could be collected through surveys, experiments, or secondary data, e.g., census data, government reports. Qualitative data could be collected through interviews, focus groups, observations, or document analysis. 6. Data analysis. After data collection, the next step is data analysis. For quantitative research, this involves statistical analysis, such as t-tests, ANOVA, regression analysis, while qualitative research requires categorizing and interpreting the data to identify patterns, themes, or trends. Quantitative data analysis. The data is analyzed using statistical software, e.g., SPSS, R, Excel, to find correlations, trends, and significance. Qualitative data analysis. The data is analyzed through methods like thematic analysis, content analysis, or grounded theory. 7. Interpretation of results. After analyzing the data, the researcher must interpret the results in the context of the original research problem or hypothesis. This involves comparing the findings to the existing literature, discussing their implications, and determining whether the hypothesis is supported or rejected. Example: if the hypothesis stated that deforestation reduces biodiversity and the data supports this, the researcher interprets the extent and mechanisms by which deforestation causes biodiversity loss. 8. Drawing conclusions. In this step, the researcher draws conclusions based on the analysis and interpretation of the data. The conclusions should summarize the key findings and provide answers to the research questions of the status of the hypothesis. Example: the study concludes that deforestation in the Amazon significantly decreases biodiversity, particularly impacting endemic species. 9. Reporting and presentation of findings. The next step is to report the findings in a clear and organized manner. This involves writing a research paper, thesis, or dissertation, and preparing the findings for publication in academic journals or presentation at conferences. The report typically includes the following sections: Introduction, background, research problem, objectives. Literature review, previous research. Methodology, research design, data collection, and analysis methods. Results, findings from the analysis. Discussion and conclusion, interpretation of results, implications, limitations, and future research. 10. Drawing implications and recommendations. The final step in the research process involves offering implications based on the findings and providing recommendations for future research or practical applications. This could include suggestions for policy changes, further studies, or practical implementations based on the results. Example: it is recommended that stricter regulations on deforestation be implemented in the Amazon to prevent further loss of biodiversity. Future research should investigate the long-term effects of climate change on the region's flora and fauna. 11. Publication or dissemination of findings. Once the research is completed, the findings should be shared with the wider academic community or stakeholders. Publication in journals, dissemination through conferences, or public reports ensure that the research contributes to the body of knowledge in the field. Example: publishing the research in an academic journal on environmental conservation or presenting it at an environmental science conference. Conclusion. The research process is a dynamic and iterative journey that starts with an idea or problem and ends with a contribution to knowledge. Each step is crucial, from identifying the problem to presenting the results, ensuring the research is systematic, reproducible, and impactful. Following these steps ensures that the research is both rigorous and valuable for the academic community or practical use in solving real-world problems. You said. Thesis and article writing. ChatGPT said. Thesis and article writing. An overview. Writing a thesis or an article is an essential part of the research process. Both require careful planning, in-depth research, and clear writing. While a thesis is generally a more extensive, in-depth research project typically required for advanced academic degrees, such as master's or PhD, an article is usually a more concise presentation of research findings, often intended for publication in academic journals. Here's a breakdown of both. Thesis writing. A thesis is a substantial work that presents the results of a detailed research study on a specific topic. It serves as a formal documentation of the research process, findings, and conclusions. 1. Structure of a thesis. The structure of a thesis is standard, although variations may exist based on the institution or field of study. A typical thesis includes the following sections. Title page. This includes the title of the thesis, the author's name, institution, degree, and the date of submission. Abstract. A brief summary of the entire thesis, including the research problem, methodology, results, and conclusions, typically 200 to 300 words. Acknowledgements. A section thanking those who helped or supported you during the research process. Table of contents. A listing of all chapters, sections, and subsections with page numbers. Introduction. An introduction to the research topic, including the background, research problem, objectives, scope, and significance of the study. Literature review. A critical review of existing literature, identifying gaps in knowledge and showing the theoretical framework for the study. Methodology. A detailed description of the research design, methods of data collection and analysis, and rationale behind their selection. Results. Presentation of the data and findings of the research. This may include tables, graphs, or charts to help in visualization. Discussion. An interpretation of the results in the context of the research question, comparing them to previous studies, and exploring implications. Conclusion. A summary of the research findings, including implications, limitations, and suggestions for future research. References. Bibliography. A list of all sources cited in the thesis, formatted according to the required citation style, e.g., APA, MLA, Chicago. Appendices. Any additional materials such as raw data, questionnaires, interview transcripts, etc. 2. Key points in thesis writing. Clarity and focus. A thesis should be clear, concise, and focused on addressing the research problem. Critical thinking. Demonstrating the ability to critically analyze literature, methods, and findings is crucial. Coherence. The thesis should flow logically from one section to the next. Each chapter should contribute to the overall argument or hypothesis. Originality. Your research should add new insights or knowledge to the field. A thesis is an opportunity to contribute to academic understanding. Rigorous methodology. A well-designed and executed research methodology strengthens the thesis. Per citation. Citations must be correct and consistent to avoid plagiarism and acknowledge the work of others. 3. Common challenges in thesis writing. Time management. Writing a thesis is time-consuming and requires effective planning to meet deadlines. Writer's block. Difficulty in getting started or continuing writing is common. Breaking the writing into manageable sections can help. Data analysis. Analyzing complex data can be challenging. It's important to stay organized and ensure that data analysis supports your conclusions. Staying objective. It is crucial to maintain an objective tone and avoid personal biases while presenting research findings. Article writing. An article is a concise academic work that presents research findings in a focused manner, often intended for publication in journals, magazines, or conference proceedings. Writing an article involves summarizing a specific research study or topic in a more compact form compared to a thesis. 1. Structure of an academic article. The structure of an academic article can vary slightly depending on the journal or publication guidelines, but a general structure includes the following sections. Title. A clear, descriptive title that reflects the main theme of the article. Abstract. A brief overview, 150-250 words, summarizing the research question, methodology, findings, and conclusions. Introduction. A concise introduction to the topic, stating the research question and its significance. Methodology. A brief explanation of the research design, methods, and data collection techniques. Results. Presentation of key findings of the study, often accompanied by figures, tables, or charts. Discussion. Interpretation of the results, comparison with existing literature, and implications of the findings. Conclusion. A brief section summarizing the main findings and potential future research directions. References. A list of citations for the sources used in the article, formatted according to the required style. 2. Key points in article writing. Conciseness. An article is much shorter than a thesis, so clarity and brevity are essential. Only the most significant findings should be included. Target audience. Write with the specific audience of the journal in mind. Academic articles are generally written for researchers or professionals in the field. Focus on results. While the introduction and methodology are important, the emphasis in an article should be on presenting the results and discussing their implications. Clear and accessible language. Although the article is academic, the language should be clear and accessible to readers with expertise in the field. Crop citations. Ensure that all references are cited correctly according to the journal citation style. 3. Common challenges in article writing. Condensing information. It can be difficult to condense a large amount of research into a few thousand words while keeping the content meaningful. Meeting journal requirements. Journals often have specific formatting and submission requirements, so it's important to follow them precisely. Revisions and peer review. After submission, the article will likely undergo a peer review process, during which revisions may be requested. This can be time-consuming but improves the quality of the article. Key differences between thesis and article writing. Thesis writing, article writing. Long, comprehensive research work. Short, concise presentation of findings typically required for degrees like master's or PhD, typically for publication in journals or conference proceedings, includes all sections. Literature review, methodology, results, discussion, conclusion. Focus on the results, discussion, and conclusion more detailed, with extensive background and theoretical framework. Focuses on key findings and their implications, written for a committee or academic supervisor, written for the broader academic community. Conclusion. Both thesis and article writing are critical components of academic research. While a thesis is a comprehensive document that requires a deeper, more extensive exploration of a topic, an article is a succinct report of specific research findings. Successful writing in both formats demands clarity, organization, originality, and a rigorous approach to research and writing. Whether writing a thesis or an article, the goal is to contribute valuable knowledge to the academic field, showcasing your research skills, analytical thinking, and academic writing proficiency. You said. Format and styles of referencing. ChatGPT said. Format and styles of referencing. Referencing is an essential part of academic writing. It allows researchers to give credit to the original sources of information and avoid plagiarism. There are several referencing styles, each with its specific format for citing books, articles, and other sources. Understanding and adhering to these styles is crucial for academic writing. Below are some of the most common referencing styles. 1. APA, American Psychological Association style. The APA style is commonly used in the social sciences, including psychology, education, and other fields. It emphasizes the author date citation system, where the author's surname and the publication year are included in the text. In text citation, APA for one author, author, year. Example, Smith, 2020. For two authors, author and author, year. Example, Smith and Jones, 2020. For three or more authors, author et al., year. Example, Smith et al., 2020. Reference list, APA books. Author, AA, year. Title of work, capital letter also for subtitle. Publisher. Example, Smith, J. 2020. Research methodologies in psychology, academic press. Journal articles. Author, AA, year. Title of article, title of journal, volume, issue, pages. Example, Smith, J. and Jones, A. 2020. Cognitive development in children. Journal of Educational Psychology, 15-3, 123-145. 2. MLA, Modern Language Association, style. The MLA style is commonly used in the humanities, especially in literature, philosophy, and cultural studies. It uses a parenthetical in-text citation system that includes the author's last name and page number. In-text citation, MLA, for one author, author page number. Example, Smith 123. For two authors, author and author page number. Example, Smith and Jones 123. For three or more authors, author et al. For three or more authors, author et al. Page number. Example, Smith et al. 123. Works cited, MLA books. Author's last name, first name, title of book, publisher, year. Example, Smith, John. Research Methods in Humanities, Oxford University Press, 2020. Journal articles. Author's last name, first name, title of article, title of journal, volume, number, no, number, year, pp, page range. Example, Smith, John, and Ann Jones, Literature and Language, a Study, Journal of Literary Studies, volume 10, number 2, 2020, pp. 123 to 145. 3.